Welcome to Laguna Podcast, an attempt at illustrating the lives and stories from Texas outdoors. Today I sit down with a man whose art speaks for himself. Known mostly for sporting art, he is also someone fond of the Western art, a true aficionado. This is my conversation with Calvin Carter. So I don't know if you've ever used these kind of microphones. These just kind of speak like 3 fingers away from it and just enunciate into the microphone. Because obviously, like the further you go away, it sounds a lot worse.
Okay.
Aside from that, like, do you have any other questions? Anything you want to get clear before we do it?
I don't think so. If we need to go to the bathroom or something, do I need
Yeah,
to give
you just tell me. We'll pause it.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Well, this is awesome. I'm glad we're finally here. I got the artist, the painter himself, Calvin Carter, and we've been trying to get together for a while now, with a lot of delays, but nonetheless, we're finally here. Would you like to kind of introduce yourself before we kind of get into the conversation?
Sure. My name is Calvin Carter. I've been painting since I was about 5 years old when I won my first art contest in kindergarten. Mm-hmm. It was, I think, some geese coming into a rice field or something like that. And so waterfowl has always been a big deal for me since I was real young, growing up in the Katy Prairie area around Hempstead. Hunted a lot of geese and ducks. Fishing was introduced to me at a young age. I think my mom tells stories of me trying to catch the minnows in a bucket when I was like 2, and my dad screaming at me, killing my bait.
Yeah.
So, it's been around for some time in your life. And the drawing picked up, and I remember going out looking at geese with binoculars when I was a kid, drawing, and coming back and trying to recreate what I saw. And so it was pretty interesting. And I guess from there, it just blossomed and through my life. And then I won my first national art contest when I was, I think, 17. It was the Isaac Walton Youth League contest. And I remember I was really excited because I got to win a pair of waders. And before then, my parents never bought waders. You shot a duck out the middle of the pond, you went and got a rod and reel to try to bring it in, or you kept throwing sticks, or you just got wet.
A real cast and blast.
Yeah, exactly. There was only a couple of options there. Either you just, most time Dad would just wait out there and get wet because he didn't want to see you lose your first duck or your, but he would be letting you know all the way about how he had put himself on the line to get cold and wet for you for that. So, chores were the thing you had to do when you get back home to pay up for it. But, it was fun growing up there. A lot of hunting and fishing, and very inspirational to my artwork, I think. And eventually I went to college at Lamar University, where I was, I think I was talking to you about this a little earlier before we got on air, was I was founded by a guy by the name Gib Delisle from Louisiana. He was a business guy, and he had come to the Waller County Fair to buy, I don't remember if it was like steer or goat or something. Like, he would always help out the FFA kids everywhere. And he decided to walk through a part of the fairgrounds where the artwork was on display. And he came across this painting I did of a trout trying to hit a spoon. And I'm not going to tell you it was an original piece. It was a lot of inspiration from one of John Dearman's pieces I'd seen. So it wasn't a total copy of John Dearman's.
Oh, the redfish one?
No, this was a trout I did in high school. And it won Best of Show. But there was really no other artists in town but me. So it wasn't really tough to win. There was a couple other guys that did it, and we were all friends, but I was really the only one who'd been doing it pretty much my whole life. And he saw my work, and he told the lady, he said, "Hey, who painted this picture?" And she said, "Oh, that's our local, young artist, Calvin Carter." And she's like, "Well," he's like, where's he at right now?" And she said, "Oh, I think he went off to go get something to drink or something. He'll be back." And so I come back, and this man introduces himself. Now, mind you, he's an older man, and I'm, 17, almost 18 years old. And I grew up with a dad who was a police officer, and a grandpa who was military police. So I'm looking at this man like, you're an old pervert or something? You look kind of sketchy. This guy's really trying to help me go to college. He's thinking, he's already, the wheels are turning in his head. Like, how can I get this kid, this kid to get some help? He's talented. He needs to go to school. Because he kept asking me, are you going to go to college? And I'm like, I don't know. None of my family's ever been to college. Like, I haven't, I'd like to. I'm looking at him like, you have the money, you pull it out and I'll go, But, I don't think it's going to happen. And so basically he reached out to Jerry Newman, who's a well-known art professor and wildlife sporting artist himself in Beaumont, Texas. And from there...
This episode is made possible by our friends over at Gordy & Sons Outfitters, located in Houston, Texas, and employing a team of experienced outdoorsmen specializing in fly fishing, hunting, and wing shooting. Gordy & Sons is sure to prepare you for success in the outdoors. Next time you find yourself prepping for a weekend getaway or a bucket list trip, be sure to give them a shout.
He had gotten in touch with also Butch Kissman, who was Jack Cowan in Booth and Dearman's gallery dealer for a long time in Houston at Hacko Sporting Art Gallery, which is no longer there. But he had reached out to those guys. All three of them became kind of like my little tiny dream team. Like they all came together. They went out of their way. Jerry Newman was going to retire. And until he saw my work, he said, well, I'll stay on 4 more years till he graduates.
Wow.
Which is, a pretty big dedication for someone who could easily go retire.
Yeah.
To stay on to help a kid. So that was like, they don't make teachers like that anymore. It was an amazing guy. And so he did and helped me get through school. And so that's how I went from, small town little kid drawing and coloring ducks and geese to going to Lamar, graduating and doing artwork. And there was after I graduated, there was a lull in my artwork.
Really?
Yeah. Well, Mr. Newman had started getting ill, and we didn't realize at the time, but he was starting to get maybe dementia, and he wasn't himself no more. So I couldn't really turn to him for advice no more like I used to. Mr. Gibb had kind of went off on his own because he thought, well, I got this kid through school, and I'm going to go, he's good.
Yeah. I did my stuff. I did my part.
Yeah, fly, little bird, fly, And little did he know I had broken wings, so I wasn't going anywhere. And so I basically just sat there and kept looking at the wall going, okay, what do I do next? And so I worked all these crazy jobs from being a floral ranger at one point to collections. Probably called people that probably asking for their fridge back or something. I mean, it was crazy. And it was not a good experience. And I would do artwork, but I was kind of lost.
Okay.
And this went on for some time to eventually, I don't know how many years later it was about the time my son was born. I got a hold of Butch Kissman again. I reached out to him because Mr. Gibb had called me. Oh, that's what Mr. Gibb had called me and he said, are you painting anymore? And I said, well, I do some stuff here and there. And he goes, no, you should be doing artwork. You went through all this stuff, all this time. You should be painting. And I had kind of got to the point to where if they called, I really wouldn't answer the phone because I was ashamed. This many people had put the time into me and I just kind of let them down. I walked away. And I don't know, that day I answered the phone and he kind of ripped into me because he was always like a dad.
Yeah, okay.
And so he kind of ripped into me and he was like, you need to get back on the horse again. And I'm going to get you in touch with Butch and he'll help you out. Because he goes, this is what really got me. He goes, it's my fault too. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, I let you down. I got you through school. And then we just kind of all left you. Like no one helped guide you to the next steps, like where you needed to go next. And I was like, maybe that is what happened. Maybe that is. I mean, I felt like it was all on me, but then it was kind of like, well, maybe it would have been easier if I had a little more help. And so I kind of did look at it from both perspectives. And knowing he felt that way, it kind of gave me the confidence and energy to get back on the horse too. Because it's like, okay.
What year was this?
Oh, man, let me see. Austin's fixing to be 14 years old. So
2010?
Yeah, some time ago. Yeah.
Heard.
So it might have been a little further back than that, like 9 or 8. And I was like, like I said, it was just a really weird time. And so I got a hold of Butch, and Butch being who he is a tough old bird. Like he was kind of like, okay, I'm going to get you back out here and give you a shot. And I want you to work real hard for the next year. And we're going to work toward trying to get you some commissions and some things happening.
Had you had any commissions up until that point?
Yeah, but it was, little things here and there, nothing with any money really.
Yeah, I mean, nothing, no sustenance, I guess.
A lot of little portrait paintings, people's dogs or cats, I did some religious paintings for a while. I went off on some different tangents trying to find myself and just exploring art kind of, I guess, which in a way was kind of nice to be free like that, but it wasn't really helping me pay the bills very much because school teaching does not technically really pay very well. So it was kind of tough. And I was just painting to paint and kind of, just jumping around little art leagues and stuff. And I don't even think I was fishing or hunting much at that point either. So I wasn't even outdoors much. And I got with Butch. He was really hard on me. I would send him paintings. And he was like, "Ugh, this is not good.
Really?
You need to keep working." I'd get some more together, show it to him. And he was one of those guys too that he didn't do the internet thing, email. So if you wanted to show him a painting, you have to pack him up, drive him to Houston, just for him to tell you, this sucks, and then send you back home. And so that went on for a while. And then eventually we got some commissions. And the first commission we got was with this guy, Brent Moreland out of Houston. He was good friends with Tom Knapp, the famous skeet shooting Olympic. I didn't know. Yeah, Tom Knapp had his own TV show for a long time. He was on the History Channel and stuff like that for the most skeet. Like, I don't remember how many skeets Tom would shoot. It was like he'd throw up 6 or 9 or something at one time and just shoot them all before they hit the ground.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, he could shoot I was told he could shoot an aspirin with a BB gun. I mean, you can go watch those videos. Like, he even sent me videos of his hunting shows, and he hosted this show with Benelli all over the country. And at this time, he was with CZ USA, I think it was the shotgun company. And so we did this first commission with him about duck hunting. And I remember being so stressed out doing this commission because I was like, oh my God, this guy's like famous. I got to do a good job. I want this to be a big break.
Yeah.
They're talking about doing 3 more commissions after this because they're going to do a duck hunt, like a quail, a pheasant. And I don't remember, like, the last one was going to be a goose hunt or something like that, maybe. They weren't sure yet. Well, we got it done and completed it. It turned out well. But the problem was Tom passed away kind of unexpectedly. So it kind of threw everything in a loop. And so that whole deal just broke down. And I remember going, ugh, I thought I was finally onto something.
Yeah.
And this whole thing just crashed and burned. Like, what do I got to do now? So we kept doing stuff, and we'd pick up a few little commissions here and there. And finally, we started doing some stuff with Texas Outdoor Journal magazine with Bill Olson, doing some magazine covers.
How'd you get that gig?
Well, that was another one where Butch got me some commissions with a guy named Bill Deering out of Anahuac and Winnie area, but he also had a place in Beeville and one over in Hackberry. He wanted a big trout and a big redfish painting. And so the first one we did, I think, was a trout. And it's called Spoonfed. It's one of the first ones we did prints of ever. And we started that project, and then Bill Olson saw the painting and then decided he wanted to use it for a cover of the magazine. Wow. And then also Collectors Covey in Dallas had seen it, and they were a big sporting art gallery dealer at the time. They had all the big name guys. And then they started offering me opportunities to try to do the stamps and also do their miniature show. So things were starting to come around again. And so from there, things just kind of started rolling again. And I guess we could say it kind of went from there. And it was some highs and lows still. And, it's the way it goes. And eventually, time on now, I'd say the last 7 or 8 years, I reached out to the Sporting Art Gallery in Nashville, Tennessee. And they also have a gallery in Charleston, South Carolina, one in Beaver, Colorado. And they took me on too. And so that was really cool because then it was more like a national gallery because they have national, international clientele. So that's pretty cool because sometimes, they'll call me and say, oh, so-and-so, this guy bought your painting from Michigan. Or this guy bought a painting from Florida. And I had a tarpon painting. The thing had barely dried, I think, when it got there. And the lady's dad, he came up from Florida and he took it back home with him. Like, he bought it and they were like, we sell your stuff as soon as we get it. And there was some paintings, like, I sold them online like the day before I was shipping them out to them. And I said, hey, by the way, you're going to get the painting and I'll have to send you the check for what I owe you. And they're like, what do you mean? They're like, I already sold the painting before it ever got to you. I'm like, really? I'm like, yeah. And things just kind of went from there. But I always wanted to get into fly fishing.
Give me the timeline. What year is this now?
Fly fishing?
Yeah, like right before you started doing that fly fishing, right?
So I'm trying to think when I got into this part of it. Man, there's been so much that's happened over the years. It's about 7 or 8 years ago, I guess, when I started really getting into these other galleries and things. And that's when Collectors Covey kind of went out the market. So I had to find new galleries. And there was one year there, I remember, where I think I only had one commission the whole year.
Really?
Yeah. And I was raising my son by myself. I had him for like 7 or 8 years by myself. And so until I met my wife now and the kids we have. And it was really a hard time because one commission was just like, man, I couldn't get nobody to do stuff. And it was weird. Like I was putting stuff out there.
Was it for like lack of effort or it was just bad luck?
No, I was painting a lot, all the time. And I was painting a lot of different stuff too. I was doing a lot of portraits and things. And that's when I got into the Western art market too.
Which I definitely want to go over, yeah. For sure.
Yeah. So that's another thing that spawns off of that because I thought, well, maybe the sporting art market's kind of dead and I need to go find some new stuff. So I jumped into the Western market because I was sitting down with some friends of mine and around Brenham, Texas, close to Somerville, Texas. And we were sitting there visiting and one day and they told me, they said, man, if you're not doing any sales in the sporting wildlife art market, why don't you come start doing Western art? And I was like, well, I've always liked, I always thought Western art's pretty cool. Like I love the history and the stories and stuff like that. And they were like, well, you can do some cowboys. And I was like, yeah, I really don't want to do cowboy stuff. I grew up with a bunch of cowboy people, like, in the country. They were riding horses and stuff. I said, but I've always been real fascinated with Native American culture because some of my family were Native American. They were they were Choctaw and Cherokee on my grandma's side. And I said, yeah, I've always wanted to know more about them. And my dad and them, he used to have all kinds of Native American pictures and stuff in his little building where he worked and stuff and paintings and stuff he liked. And so I thought, I always liked that stuff. It's really cool. But I said, I don't want to do it unless I can do it as close as possible to accurate.
Okay.
Because I felt like a lot of stuff portrayed by them or portrayed of them, was not done well. You go back now that I know what I know about them, the history that I've been taught through people, very few movies ever have it correct. I mean, very few. Clothing's wrong. The way they wore their hair is wrong.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of stuff is not accurate. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into it that you have to look in and you go, all right, if I'm going to do this, I want it to be right. And that's the same thing I tried to always do with the sporting art too, is like, ducks land into the wind. Fly fishing, like Chuck Nizer taught me some pretty cool stuff. One time on one of my paintings, he goes, man, you got the guy poling, but he's poling on the wrong side because if the guy whips back his, like
the minutia, the things that make it real.
Things you don't think about.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like I told Chuck, I said, I think composition or design for the artwork, and you have to sometimes, you're not looking at it as, oh, this would never happen. So that the two things can be really hard to work with.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Like when it comes to doing this kind of stuff with painting, you can look at this stuff and go, well, man, that looks really cool. Oh, but that Native American shield's on the wrong side. Or, the way the guy's casting the bait, the fly bait, he would probably get hung in the trees behind him.
Yeah.
Just stuff like that. So you have to look at it and go, okay, that's not going to look good.
Yeah.
Someone's going to pick up on that. And so you always have to be this extreme critic. And I can't tell how many times I've looked at paintings. And one of the good things about my professor, Jerry Newman, it was so good, is he says, if it's wrong, then wipe it out and start again. Don't go with it just because eventually he said, someone's going to look at it and they're going to catch it.
Yeah.
He said, and so he used to always say, if it's wrong, wipe it out, start over. Don't be scared. Painting should never be precious. Ever.
I like that.
And Leonardo da Vinci is a good example of that too. He worked on the Mona Lisa his whole life.
Really?
Yeah. So if you look at this, he was never satisfied, obviously, with it. He was always looking to change it, improve it, move it. And it would be great if we could went back in time and took photos of each one of those progresses of that painting to see how much it really changed. And, Bob Kuhn, who's a famous wildlife artist. I love Bob Kuhn's work. And he did a little bit of sporting art for Remington and stuff a long time ago, but he was mostly known for wildlife art. He talked about getting paintings back from, like, going to a client's house and seeing a painting on the wall and going, can I take that back to my studio? And this is like 10 years after the customers bought this painting. He would take it back to the studio and rework it.
Really?
He did not like the way it looked. He's like, oh my gosh, I'm 10 years farther now down the road. I realize what's wrong with this painting. And I get that because there's times where I'll go to people's houses, I'll see a painting I did 10 years ago and I'm like, ugh, this is terrible. You should go throw it in the trash, But, and that's just the way I look at it because I was taught just, it's not precious. It's not this beautiful diamond in the rough. It is a wonderful thing, and it should be seen that way by people, and it should be something seen as, creative, and it captures a moment. But there's always room for improvement or change.
As an artist, that makes sense. But as a consumer, I would disagree that it isn't precious. I would 100% say that it is precious, for sure. It's a timepiece that kind of not signifies, but solidifies like a moment when, I don't know, someone who gets a commission, like a moment in his life. And I think that, like, but I see your point. That's the funny part. Like, I understand where you're going with that. I would like to dive in a little bit more on the Western side. So when you got into the Western art, when did you start doing all the research into like the history and stuff like that? Was it just off the jump?
So my friend Clyde and Tim Vania, and we were sitting around talking, and Clyde knew some guys named Ken Widener and Curtis Carter who did a lot of research on Western art. And there was another guy by the name Michael Badhand too, who did a lot of research. And what these guys did is they did the other side of it. Kind of, they made the stuff like it used to look,
like replicas.
Yeah, replicas.
Okay.
And what they would do is they would make stuff even for like museums. Like if a museum needed a piece to replicate a certain part, like a certain piece of regalia that was from the past, to make it look like that so they could have it on display to show, because the original piece is gone or been destroyed or just weathered out, just wore out, because some of that stuff was made of hides and sinew and stuff. It's not going to stay around forever. They would go do the research and find it and then do it. So these guys had years of background knowledge. Some of them had like over 40 years of researching these things. And so Clyde told me, he said, man, Clyde Lewis, he said, if you get in there and talk to these guys, they'll help you get started. And I said, okay. And so when I first approached Curtis Carter and Ken, they were like, most of our research has been done over Cheyennes and Southern Cheyennes. There's two bands. You have the Northern Cheyennes and Southern Cheyennes. And so the Southern Cheyennes we were really looking into, because that was the ones they had the most. And we're talking about, Kansas, Oklahoma, and North Texas, and a little bit of Colorado. And so I was like, I don't know anything about the Cheyennes. I've heard of the song Cheyenne by George Strait, but that's about as far as it goes for me. And so it was 3 or 4 years of just learning stuff, like literally calling these guys like almost every day. I'm sure they like drove them crazy, asking, hey, what's this mean? Or I looked this up, and a lot of it they would teach me, like, go and look at these old ledgers. Like, these old ledger drawings tell a lot of the stories about what they wore, how they wore it, why they wore it, why the horse has a red hand painted on the front of it. It represents he ran over somebody in battle.
Really?
What's this hairy thing hanging from the horse's mouth? Well, that's someone's scalp that he killed. And these ledgers, I have some in the house, will show those things. And one of them was pretty cool because I was doing a painting about a horse, and I wanted to represent the horse fast. And I was trying to find some paint jobs that they did on a horse. And, you watch Dances with Wolves, and they're getting ready to go on a buffalo hunt, and they're painting the horses. They would have never done that. There's no reason to.
Yeah.
And they put it to me like this. Do you put on your best suit and tie to go to Walmart to buy groceries?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
You wouldn't wear all that stuff. Because why would you wear your best headdress and clothing to hunt buffalo or animals if you're going to get blood? Because you're going to have to skin that thing as soon as you kill it. Why? I mean, you fish. Do you really want to wear your best clothes cleaning a trout and redfish?
Yeah.
You're not going to wear a tuxedo to go do that.
Yeah.
It'd be a cool photo. But you're not going to do that, And that's what they were saying, is these guys were looking at it as this is everyday life. This is not, we're posing to make a cool painting for them. This is their life. This is the way they had to do it. And I found out that they would tie their braids behind their head when they're skinning animals, because it makes sense. If I'm leaning over an animal, my hair is going to get in the blood, right? Well, I don't want that. I'm going to tie it behind my head. So just things that you never see in paintings, because a lot of artists have never done the research to find out or looked into this stuff. And so that's the things I wanted to know. And so then I got to talking to actual Cheyennes. A friend of mine, Manoma Little Hawk, and George Levi, both Cheyennes, and they started to help me.
Really?
Give me advice and tell me stuff. And they were like, oh, I like the painting you did the other day. That reminds me of a picture of my grandma. And Manoma would tell me these really cute little stories about her grandma when she was little, and how they would carry they go on the wagons and stuff like that still, and from back and forth, and there was people they would visit with and all these things. And so it was really cool to see it from that end. And then one day I posted one. It was two Native Americans riding across the plains, and they're both pulling back on their horses because off in the distance they can see this dust cloud. And I was inspired by that because I was riding on a trip with Curtis and Ken to take pictures. It was my son, Austin. He was little. And we decided to go across the plains and photograph places in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Colorado, like actual places like Bent's Fort. We went there, went to Sand Creek. We went to the Rickaroo Breaks. We went to Beecher's Island, all famous places. The Cheyenne had been at battles and things had happened. One is where the dog soldiers were wiped out. So we got to go to all kinds of really cool places. And as we're riding, I got out to take pictures. I saw this car way off in the distance causing all this dust. But I couldn't see the car. I could just see the dust.
Okay.
And I thought, I bet you a long time ago when buffalo or wagons or people on horseback off in the distance, groups would make this kind of dust off in the distance like a cloud. And these Native Americans, they would have spotted this.
Yeah.
And been like, okay, woo, we got to back up. Hold on. We need to get back and let everybody know. So, either it's buffalo we need to go hunt, or someone's encroaching on our area, And so I thought, well, this would be a cool painting. So I titled it Something in the Distance. Well, I posted the painting, and a gentleman by the name of Daniel Long Soldiers, who's become a very good friend of mine. I have quite a few pieces of his in the house, actually. And he's the funniest guy. I love talking to him. He's hilarious. And he's got a great story. And he's an artist, too. He's been doing ledger art of his people, Lakota people, for a long time, but other tribal groups, too, as well. And he would see the painting, and he just put in the message on Facebook, call me with a number. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So either he's gonna be mad at me for doing this painting because I'm a white guy doing paintings of this, or he's gonna tell me something else. So I thought about it. I was like, okay, should I call this guy? All right, I'll call him. And so I called him, and he answered. And Daniel, he grew up on the reservation. He was part of that group that kids that got moved around to different schools when they were real young, because he's in his 80s now. Like, he got shipped down to live with Apache kids at one time, and he said that was really tough because there was a lot of fighting going on every day, and stuff, because the different groups didn't get along.
Wow.
And he said, did you do that painting? I said, straight out the gate. I said, which one? He goes, the one on Facebook I commented on. I said, yes, sir. He goes, man, that is a really good painting. I said, oh, well, I really appreciate it. He goes, that reminds me of my great-grandfather, Long Soldiers, who used to tell these stories about being on the plains. And he said, that's the way I envisioned his stories, exactly the way you paint that picture.
Wow.
He says, how do you know all that stuff? I said, what do you mean? He goes, you paint stuff in there that most people don't know about. He goes, stuff that I know about because it's my culture. But he goes, you know, too. And I said, well, I've been real blessed to have a lot of people help me in research and teach me, and have gone out of their way to help me make sure my paintings are as close as possible. And he goes, well, that's really cool because, that you know that, and that you've learned that, and that you wanted to do that. And he goes, I love that you're putting in the paintings. He goes, really, the funniest comment he made of all, he goes, why do white people always paint us in the mountains with no clothes? And I said, I don't know. He goes, you actually have us on the plains because that's where we were. He goes, we went in the mountains too, but he goes, it's cold. He goes, nobody wants to be up there with just, a breechcloth on and some moccasins. That's, it's very cold. And so I started laughing because I was like, yeah, I get what you're saying. So he and I, that began a really long friendship. It's been going on for like 4 or 5 years now. And like I said, I own a piece of his artwork, and he's just a really funny guy. I love talking to him. He's always talking about going and finding some pork chops and some ice cream to eat and stuff. He's a hoot. And, but he'll tell me stories, and he was trying to teach me how to say a Lakota word one day. It was really fun. Yeah. And I would say it back, and he was like, And then I'd say it back again. He goes, Finally, I tried the third time. He goes, that's close enough.
That Something in the Distance painting, had you confirmed that that's how they would act when they saw dust in dust or like groups or whatever in a ledger, or was that just kind of like out of intuition and then you got confirmed? It
was kind of coming from being a hunter myself, and always being aware, like when you're a kid hunting and stuff, oh, there's geese over there. Yeah. You got a duck down, there's ducks, or coyotes. Like I come run across those before, and deer. And I think what it was just kind of like in trying to, like when I do those paintings, I try to take myself back in time and envision like, what's their life like? And I've tried reading books too to help, kind of put some inspiration there. Like I've heard books where I've read a book called Captured that's really good. Empire of the Summer Moon about the Comanches in Texas, and just some of those books alone. And I read Wooden Legs book, who was one of the Northern Cheyennes who actually survived the Battle of Bighorn, and talks about his experiences even before the Battle of Little Bighorn. So he really goes into like their way of life. And you'll hear him talk about seeing things off in the distance. So it kind of put those two things together.
Gotcha.
Like, it probably would have came, I try to always look at it as, on a rating scale of like 1 to 100%, like, would this have probably happened? Oh, yeah, probably about 70% chance that this is probably something that really would have happened to him. Like, this is everyday life. I mean, it happened to me that day, just taking a picture with a car way off in the distance. So I'm sure they would have dealt with something similar, So that's kind of the way I look at it. I kind of try to do it that way. And that's one of the things they always ask me. Everyone I've ever talked to, from my friends who are Crow to Comanche to Apache to Cheyenne and Lakota, they've always told me, when you do these paintings, stay with our everyday life stuff. Stay away from our religious things like that. And I'm like, I can respect that, because they're like, you don't want me painting a picture of Jesus.
Heard.
And I'm like, okay, I can respect, what you're coming at with that. So just the everyday life stuff, like they've told me, we don't feel offended by you doing that or whatever, especially if you're going to put the time in and you talk to people and you research and you look into the clothing and you look into the patterns and know you're doing the right stuff and you're putting a title to it that actually fits with what's going on from from studying ledgers and things and stuff. So that's what I try to do.
Wow. That is so cool.
Oh, it's so much work too. It's not.
But I'll ask one more question on the Western stuff. But what are some of the facts that you've learned that you think stood out to you the most while doing your research, or at least like stuff that you read like while going through ledgers?
Okay, some of the stuff that really I thought was cool was I was reading Empire of the Summer Moon, and the Comanches were such well-known horse riders. They were tough. They were known as horse people. And, the Comanches lived in Texas, and there's different groups of Comanches. Everyone thinks, oh, Comanche is just one, but there was I think there's 7 or 8 different groups within that. You have like a Plains group, and there's one called the honeybee eaters, I think, or something like the honeybee. I'm probably telling y'all wrong here, but you can look it up. You can find it. But they talked about them, if they had to, they would drink the water out of a dead horse's stomach to survive.
Really?
Yeah. And I was like, and that's pretty hardcore survival stuff. And when you watch these movies, and I'm not picking on Dance with the Wolves because I actually like the movie, but it romanticizes their lives. It's like this beautiful running through the flowers, rubbing about, scratching the buffalo's back and having a good old time. That's not the way it was. It was a very brutal way of life. Harsh. Matter of fact, if you read Wooden Legs' book, he talks about finding some of the women hanging themselves from the trees.
Jesus.
Because life was so tough. It was just hard.
Yeah.
And a lot of the women, if you go into the research, their lives were tough. I mean, they took care of the kids. They skinned the hides. They beaded everything. They put the teepees up. They helped move the camp. They took the camp down. I mean, they did all that stuff. Their lives were from sun up to sundown, constantly busy. And so there was a lot of fascinating things there just to find out the differences and stuff. And the men, they hunted. And I didn't realize this, but a lot of the men that were hunting and warriors were really young. We're talking about teenagers to 20s. And after that, it starts to cut off. And you start becoming the old dude that sits around the camp and, smokes the pipe and draws pictures and tells stories. And your knowledge is more valuable to the people now because you experience things. And a lot of it's because, as some people have told me, when there's a guy, Michael Badhand, I was talking about, he and I were talking one time, and he did this thing and write up. It was pretty cool to talk about. He's actually hunted buffalo on horseback with some of the older stuff like spears and bows and arrows. And he talked about buffalo, and it's just like a lot of animals. When hunted, the first thing they're going to do is run into the worst terrain they can to try to get rid of you. And people don't realize prairie dog holes were all over the plains a long time ago. And when you're riding a horse, last thing you want is a landmine full of holes.
Yeah.
Land just to run through. I mean, your horse breaks a leg. What's going to happen? You're coming off the horse.
Yeah.
Your horse is your main car. I mean, he's getting you around all over the place. And he's down, you're down. And so there was a lot of stuff there. He even talked about one time, he said he was riding and his horse went to jump a stump or something, a mound of dirt or over a little gully or something. And he accidentally speared his horse in the neck because it was a dangerous game. It wasn't just for anybody to, jump on. And, you see the movies make it look like their lives were so easy, but I can only imagine how many of those guys came back with broken legs and broken body parts. And I know there was one I was reading in Wooden Legs' book. He's talking about their bear hunting, and this guy, tries to stop this bear from getting him, and bear kills the guy.
Wow.
I mean, it was just whatever is going to happen is going to happen.
Yeah.
But then I see these TV shows and stuff that come out with stuff, and they try to go into that, but then they make it like either too dark or too weird. Like it doesn't still fit. Like you can tell they're not really doing the research still. And that's the part that You're
talking like American Primeval?
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I've just seen the previews.
I liked it. I liked it. It was a little heavy. It was a little raw. But like hearing you talk right now, I feel like you'll be like, oh, this is a little over dramatized.
Yeah, sometimes it is. And I haven't seen that one. I've just seen some of the previews. But like, there was a movie that came out called The Sun a long time ago with Charles. I think it was Pierce Bronson. I think it was, and it was in Texas about the Comanches and him being captured when he was a kid. And some of the stuff in that one has some pretty factual things that happened in it. And the way they're dressed at times and the way they look is pretty close to accurate too. And some of my friends, the guys who taught me, actually helped work on that film, actually dress some people. And that's the hard thing about doing those films. And I get it from the producer's point of view is moccasins are not easy to make. And then you got to make a different size for, 9 or 10 different guys on a set.
Yeah.
And then you'd have to make leggings, and then you'd have to make, they wore shirts. And they did have, war shirts like the old animal hide shirts and stuff too. But as time went on, there was a lot of people trading everywhere. And so they were wearing, I mean, would you rather wear heavy, hot animal hide, or would you rather wear, a flannel shirt, or something that breathes? And so that's the thing that they would talk about too, is like, if you had stuff that you could use that benefited you, then why would you go back to the old ways of wearing this or that? So they were also advancing and stuff too at the same time. And a lot of my work, I try to look at between like the 1860s and 1880s. And it's really hard to do widespread timeline with that because so many things change. Like, it's just like now, like, you look at the style of people's clothes in the 1920s and from the 1940s and into the 60s to now, I mean, you just see constant change. And the same thing with them. They were changing too. It wasn't always the same. And that's another thing I think people miss out about them is, they just wore the same buckskin clothes all the time, but it didn't. Things changed, styles changed, and that's another thing that we try to stay up with on the research part of it.
Wow. That is labor intensive if I've ever heard it.
That's just a small amount. I told you.
Let's move towards the fishing stuff. I really wanted to touch up on the Western stuff, obviously, because you'd made a separate Instagram for all that, and I'm a huge fan of all the stuff that's on there. But on the fishing side of it, was there a point like when you were kind of starting to notice people were like coming for the fly fishing art? Or was it more so like, I don't know if I'm wording it right, but like, was there a point when you realized, okay, the Instagram's kind of kicking off, like I'm starting to get my name out there in the more modern side of the industry versus by word of mouth or by grassroots style?
Yeah, I would say I can't tell you the actual time period because it kind of flows real smoothly. The transitions kind of happen. You don't think about it at the time. You're just thinking about, okay, I got to get this next painting done and get it out the door. Because you have deadlines and the commissions, you can only put them out for so long, and then you have to get them done. It's kind of like I tell people it's like a taxidermy field. Like, you take the fish and, okay, be ready in the next 6 to 12 months. Because for me, like, you never know what's going to happen. We have 6 kids we raised, my wife and I, and my kids are all into different things. And so they're young. They go from age 2 all the way to 14. So you got like tonight I have a band concert thing to go to. So no painting, but I've got deadlines.
Yes.
So I mean, and then I work a regular job too as a high school art teacher. So with the fishing, I think it started to branch out when I started seeing customers from like Florida and South Carolina and Georgia and stuff, and other places start to reach out to me and want to see more fishing things, you know. And I was starting to learn that, you know, when you do fishing for like the East Coast, speckled trout really don't get on the list.
Yeah.
You know, it's more people over there want to see tarpon and redfish and bonefish, you know, stuff like that. So my sales was different when I started getting with the galleries in like South Carolina and Nashville. Speckled trout, you know, it's like, we really not get those. You know, you can just leave those off the list. We'd rather have, you know, permit and bonefish and tarpon and redfish. You know, those are really kind of the big ones that people are looking for. And, you know, as much as I would love to just do a really cool sheephead painting, I don't see a huge market.
Yeah.
You know, I've had guys ask me, like, will you ever do a sheephead painting? And I'm like,
maybe for like a tournament for awards, like at the Sheepy in Louisiana or something. But
well,
like, it's niche, yeah.
Have you ever been to Hackberry Rod and Gun?
No.
Okay, they have a hardhead painting in there. And it's in their dining room where you eat. And my redfish and trout spoon-fed prints are in there too, you know. But my favorite painting in there is that hardhead.
I have a skipjack painting. I'm not gonna lie.
Okay, well, I mean, you know, everybody should have that one little weird painting, you know. And that's the hardhead one always cracks me up every time I go in there, because I'm like, you know, some artists brave enough
to spend their time to do that,
to paint that to the best of their ability. You know, they probably had to go out there and catch one, which we know how elusive they are, you know. And so that was a really, you know, cool thing. And I've always wanted to do some funny stuff. Like that's where the pot lickers painting came in, and I did.
Yeah.
Because I was with Danny New.
Yeah.
And I had, God bless Danny, he decided to have 4 of my young children on the boat fishing at one time. And Danny being Danny, he's like, well, they're going to lure fish. There ain't going to be no bait fishing. And I'm like,
LSU only.
I'm like, yeah, LSU only, baby. And I'm like, lure fishing? You realize they're like from 8 years old to like 12. You know how many lines that's going to be flying in the air? Do you know, we don't have any armor on Danny. I don't want my ear pierced.
Yeah.
Well, I got to give them credit, though. They were all wonderful. All 4 of them did a great job. And Danny was wonderful with them. I mean, I was like, man, dude, you're like the Mr. Rogers of the Port Mansfield or something. You know, we're going to take the kids fishing today.
Yeah.
He's out there just really awesome with them. And he did such a good job. They all caught fish. But this guy comes in and cuts us off at one point. And I'm like, Danny, dude, I love you, but this is started turning from PG-13 to like a little X-rated with the language, dude.
Yeah.
There's like 4 little kids in this boat, and they're not used to that kind of language, you know. And Danny's like, these people, you know, blah, 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 blah. He's going off, and I'm just laughing. And so I thought, and I don't remember if he said it. I'd heard the term before, but I think he said it again. He goes, hey, freaking pot lickers, you know. And I'm like, oh, I did a sketch before that, but I never followed through with it.
Yeah.
And I had like a new inspiration for doing it now after seeing that day.
Is Danny's shallow sport in that picture?
No, I don't think so, unfortunately. Because I was in the boat with him, so I didn't get any pictures of the boat. You know? But it was real inspirational. But anyway, I kind of got off topic with that story, but it was just funny how that's how paintings come about sometimes.
Yeah.
With Ryan and I, you know, I've done paintings with him, and he's just, because he's taking me to really cool places, and just like Ernest Cisneros, Ryan and I can sit on the boat and just talk for hours and never fish.
Yeah, that happens with Ryan.
Yeah. And we get into all kinds of philosophical things. I mean, we'll touch base on things that most people probably don't even want to hear about while they're fishing, you know. And I enjoy that part of stuff with Ryan, because there's some days I just want to go down there and do that. And Ernest and I have done the same thing. Like there's times where like my son was with us fishing, and we just left him fishing.
Yeah.
And on the other side of the boat, and Ernest just sits there, and we just start visiting, and we'd have great conversations. And I enjoy that time. And that's one of the things why I think the Laguna Madre is special to me, is that it's not just the place, it's the people that you go there with. And that's what inspires the artwork. Like, I feel like I have to always put this extra ounce of beauty into the artwork that comes from there, because the place is so beautiful.
Would you ever self-commission yourself to do one of that snook?
Yeah, I feel like
it has to be in your list,
I actually have a sketch of it drawn up in a sketchbook somewhere around here in the big pile of my mess. And it's been thought out to do.
Yeah.
And I think it would be a fun one. And that snook was really special to me. I'm waiting for the mount to come back. It should be ready in another month or two. Yeah.
That's awesome.
New Wave Taxidermy in Florida is doing it.
Wow.
And I didn't really want to do it at the time, but I have a really good friend, Stacy Schaff. He's done some really good work with those guys, like, you know, a lot of his snook, because he goes down there and has caught a lot of nice snook with Ernest, and he's caught a lot of big trout. He's caught like 30 over 30-inch trout in one day. And he's got some mounts, and I saw his mounts. And being an artist, I'm not gonna lie, I get pretty picky about mounted stuff. Like if it looks kind of funny,
that makes sense. Yeah,
paint job looks weird, I'm like, you know. And I'm kind of waiting for the mount to come back because I may try to use it as part of the reference for the painting. But we'll see. We shot photos of it that day, but we were wanting to get that snook back in the water and let him live. You know, I didn't want him to go through any more stress than he already been, because he got hung up in that pier.
So why don't you run through that whole story?
Okay. So we were down there. It was June 11th, 2023.
Yeah, it was like recently too. It was
2023. And my wife, my 3 daughters, and my 3 sons, because the baby was born, he was real little. At the time he was about 6 months old. We were staying down at Miss Terry's place down there on the Arroyo. And we loved going down there. I'd been going down there for some time, even before my wife and I got married, with my son Austin. And he and I used to just go down there by ourselves. And we'd fish with Brian or Ernest. And we really got to know Miss Terry, mostly because Ryan had introduced her to us. And so that morning, the baby had woke up like babies do, early in the morning, crying, fussy, you know. Well, he loved going outside. So we decided, well, let's walk him down to her pier and just sit there and just kind of watch, you know, how beautiful and peaceful it could be on the Arroyo in the morning. Like, sun's coming up, you know, it's just hear the gulls and the little ships the boats going out, go fish for the day and stuff. And so we went down there, and my wife was like still in her nightgown. She's holding the baby and bouncing him on the knee, and I'm sitting in the chair next to her, and I'm sitting there looking at the water, and it's barely getting daylight, and the light from on the pier had just went out. And so I was like, oh, okay. So it's enough daylight, and I thought, man, I can't sit here like this. I told her, I said, I got to get a rod and reel and at least make some casts, because there's got to be some trout in the water. I see a little popping here and there. So I'm going to try to catch a couple of these little trout. And about the 5th cast, it looked like somebody flushed a toilet bowl. And it couldn't have been no more than like 5 feet from the pier. And my line just took off. And now I wasn't set for anything like this. The rod and reel was probably got like, 8-9 pound test line. It's a small spinning rod and reel. It's mostly for like light tackle fishing. And the next thing I know, my line's out in the middle of the Arroyo River. I'm like, goodness gracious, what is this? And I told my wife, it's kind of like the Jaws movie. We need a bigger boat. I was like, we're going to need a net. We're going to need a net. This is not going to be something we're going to be able to reach down and pull up on the pier. And she was like, okay. And she's, like, what is it? And I'm like, either it's a really big trout or I don't know, because I don't think it's a redfish. I said, he's not holding down, it's not holding down real deep. It's staying kind of close to the top. Well, it was shaking and making boils and stuff, but I couldn't really make out what it was because it's still early in the morning. Finally, I get it within about, maybe 15 yards to the pier, and I see its back, and I see the black lateral line. And then I was like a deer hunter who just saw this, 12-point buck walk out, and now I've got buck fever. I've lost it because I'm like, oh my gosh, 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 big snook, big snook, big snook, And my wife's like, calm down, calm down. She's like, you were so much calmer before when you thought it was just a trout. I'm like, well, I've caught a 30-inch trout before. So but this is something I've been trying to catch for 4 or 5 years. Ernest and I went, and the one time me and Ernest got really close to getting one with him, my uncle had just died the night before, and I don't think my head was in the game that morning. Like, I pulled the lure out of one's mouth on a topwater run that, I should have never done that, but I just couldn't get focused. I had too much going on. And, and I didn't even told Ernest at one time, if I can just catch like a little 6 or 12-ounce snook and say I caught a Texas one, I'm good. It's off my list. Well, this one here, I could tell would eat my 6 or 12-inch snook. And so I kept trying to get him to stay away from the piers. And I'd be dang if he finally did not just kind of run me over into the neighboring pier, which was really about rod length away from the one pier to another. You could almost skip across it. But the problem was the lady next door, or the guy next door, had a Doberman. And I didn't really want to try to go over there. And sure enough, the snook got hung up on the piling and on the pier. And I said, well, I felt slack in my line. And I remember just like this sinking, sick feeling in my stomach. Like it's over.
Oh my God.
I was so sick in my stomach. And I told my wife, I said, well, I guess I'm just going to break the line. And she goes, wait, don't break the line. Let's go get the lure back at least. And I said, well, I don't even know if that's going to be there. I said, there's no telling how hung up it is in that pier. And I said, we can't go over there. There's a dog anyway. It's going to chew our leg off. She said, well, let's get Miss Terry. Miss Terry knows the dog. I said, oh, that's true. So she went up there and got Miss Terry. And the whole time, this snook's still tied to the pier over there.
Right
He's still hung up over there. She comes down, Miss Terry does, and she goes across the little fence, and I hand her the rod and reel from her pier to their pier. That's how close it was. I just reached across. Well, she starts, and I guess she hadn't used her spinning rod in a long time. She had it upside down, and she starts reeling it, and all of a sudden she starts screaming and yelling, help, help. And I'm like, what? He's still on. And I'm like, oh my God, are you serious? And so she's fighting this thing. Well, it's trying to take her to the next pier. So my wife, I don't know. I still to this day don't know how she did this. She hands me the baby. She runs over like Wonder Woman, grabs, scoops the net up one-handed, jumps the fence. And she goes over there and she nets this thing. So technically, I really am not the only person that caught this fish. Miss Terry,
team effort.
Terry and my wife, all three of us, were in on this. And I gotta give the ladies credit, man. They were on top of their game. I mean, at the end, I was holding the baby instead of the fish.
Trade off.
They bring this snook back to me, and I'm like, holy moly, this thing is big.
Yeah.
It's like, I feel like the two guys from the Grumpier Old Men movie when they catch that big catfish at the very end. Have you ever seen that movie?
No, never.
Oh my God, I love that movie. They call him Catfish Hunter. He's been in the lake for years. And here's this giant snook, and I'm looking at this thing going, man, this thing has been around for a long time. And I'm measuring, and we didn't get a totally good measure like bent tail, but we got 35 inches without bending tail. So I'm sure it might be a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
But his mouth, it felt like I was holding on to a bicycle tire because his whole lip was just,
really,
and I could tell he was starting to lose oxygen, and I was starting to get kind of worried about him. So I hurried up and got him to the end, got a few pictures and started rubbing him back and forth. And finally he took off. So I went inside the house, or the little house where we were staying, and the kids were in there. They were still asleep. They didn't get to see it. And I sat down, and I was kind of still shaking from the whole experience,
I bet.
And then it dawned on me. This was the same day, a year before, same morning time, that I went in the hospital with blood clots in my lungs from COVID and almost died.
Wow.
I literally almost died. I could feel myself fixing to die, at one point when I was in the hospital. This pain was so much that my whole body just went numb. I couldn't feel anything. And I pulled through that for a long time. And it just wow, this fish was I felt like it was some kind of a spiritual gift or something saying, hey, you're going to be okay. It was this thing sent to me to say, you've been through all this stuff, but you're going to be okay. You got more time to go. And then I realized that's why I was so concerned about this fish getting back in the water and breathe, because he was struggling to breathe. So I felt his pain, because I was still, at that point in time, it was a year later, I was still feeling pain in my left side from the blood clots. Oh yeah, I still feel them every once in a while if I cough or something. There's still pain there. Because clotting, it's have you ever been, had the wind really knocked out of you?
Yeah.
Okay, imagine that lasting for days. Yeah, that's what it feels like when blood clots get you. It's really painful. And it can cut off your oxygen just so much. It's unbelievable how much it chokes you. And so when, I had eventually went with a Houston doctor, and he was like, man, he's showing me pictures. And this was George Bush's doctor, pulmonologist. And he's like, man, you should easily died with the blood clots. He said, look at this. He was showing he had this amazing computer graphic of my lungs. He was turning it all three-dimensional different ways and showing how stacked up they were in there. It was just the whole one side, it was almost covered up.
Wow.
And just got really lucky that none of them got to my heart. But yeah, that was the snook story. So I had to get that. I told my wife, I said, we have to get that fish mounted because it's so special because of the day it happened.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
You were there, the baby. And that was the cool thing about the baby was him being there and me with him is when I went in the hospital the day I almost died a year before, we had just found out she'd been pregnant for a couple weeks.
Wow.
So I didn't know if I was going to see the baby.
Wow.
So it was just kind of cool the way the whole thing happened.
Yeah.
Terry's always been super special to us. And so having her there to be a part of it, and her just getting in on it, getting to fight it a little bit herself. Yeah. It's cool. And I caught another snook that week too. I caught a different species of a fat snook. So I caught two there. And, yeah, I kind of want to go back to the Roy and catch some more snook.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I saw the picture, I was jealous because I remember thinking, there's no way he just caught that fish in such a public place, not public place, but like such a like a normal place.
Yeah.
Not to mention I didn't know it was like early in the morning. I'd seen it like around 10 or maybe 1 p.m. and it was just light out in the picture, and I was like, what? Like that didn't make any sense to me, but that's awesome. That's cool.
Yeah, Ryan Sparrow, I'll never forget. I love him, and he was being like a brother to me. He's like, you asked, and I'm quoting him there. He was like, you asked, he goes, I've been living down here for like ever, never caught one, and here you are catching like 2 in 1 week, and one big one at that. And Ernest, like, I'll never forget, he gave me this message. He was like, well, you can scratch that off your list now. And I was like, yep, because that was pretty cool. Huh? And I was like, yep, that was real cool.
You should title that one Scratched Off.
Yeah, scratched off, man. Bucket list snook, it's gone, And that's why I told my wife, I said, if I never catch another snook now, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way I am with the rainbow trout. I got a customer who took me up to Alaska when I first started doing the commissions.
Okay.
In the sporting art, he flew me up there. Mm-hmm. He called me one day out of the blue, and he's like, hey. And he was the same guy with Tom Knapp. Mm-hmm. Except this was a couple years later, and he calls me and says, hey, you ever want to go to Alaska? I was like, well, yeah, of course everyone always want to go to Alaska. Like, who doesn't do sporting art or wildlife art and not want to go to Alaska? That's like one of the ultimate places to still go,
Yeah.
He's like, you want to go about a month or 2? And I'm like, yeah. I was like, but I can't afford it. And he goes, no, you're not going to pay to go. I'm going to pay everything for you to go. I just want you to do some artwork for me. And I said, sure. Yeah, we can do it. Book it. He said, now you're going to have to get out there and start walking every day and get some exercise because it's going to be tough. And I was like, okay. So I'd go walking like 30, 40 minutes every day. I lived in Jasper, Texas at the time. I'd walk these hills and stuff every day. And I was so glad I did because when I got there, we were in the rivers fishing, and the river there, water's moving.
Yeah.
And so it can be tough on you. We were fishing all day, which all day in Alaska is, into the night. We never saw the nighttime there when I was there. We were at the peak of the summer where it only got dark for like an hour.
That's insane.
So it was so weird. And I'm one of those people that can't sleep during the day. Like if there's light out, I can't go to sleep. So we had to cover all the windows and everything. But he gets me out there and we're fishing. And I had just got through catching a bunch of rainbow trout. And I caught one that was like 24 inches. Mm-hmm. Now we were using lures at the time. I did a little bit of fly fishing with him, but not much. And time of year, it was really the lures seemed to be like the thing the guides had us doing. And like I said, the guy, he was paying for it, so whatever he wanted me to do, I was going to do. Well, when I first got there too, though, the guy who owned the place, the lodge, Katmai Lodge, he comes up to me and he goes, I still have my luggage in my hand. And he goes, hey, I hear you're an artist. And I go, yeah. He goes, I got a project for you. And I'm like, really? I'm like, I've come all the way up here. I really don't want no projects unless it's fishing, And he's like, well, we have this old boat out there in front of the building, and we're wondering if you would paint something on it for us. And so I'm like, yeah, I can do that. I'm like, what do you want to do? And me being who I am, I'm thinking all these grand ideas. Like, we're going to do this and this and this and that, He's like, maybe just put our name on there. And I'm like, I literally looked at the guy and go, that's really boring. And he was like, what are you thinking? Let's paint a fish across the boat.
Wow.
Let's put what's the biggest fish, like a really popular fish with the salmon, I mean, they're a big deal. Let's put one of those big red, I think it was Chinook salmons or whatever. It's got the kind of hook looking mouths and stuff. Let's put that on there. And we did like a fly reel and rod underneath it with like a line whipping across in there with a fly. It was, and the boat was in bad shape. It had been sitting out in the weather for a long time. And it was an old wooden boat. So we had to bring it indoors. And I said, mind you, we're out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, we need to get some paint. And he's like, well, what do you need? And I said, well, I need this, this, and this, and these kind of brushes and all this stuff. Okay, I'll send my guy today. It'll probably be about 2 days when he gets back. I'm like, what? It's like, it's going to be a couple of days for him to go get all the supplies. So this poor guy, he left. And like a couple of days later, he comes back with all this stuff. And I'm like, good gosh, where did you go? Like Russia?
Yeah.
Like where have you been? He's like, oh, I had to go so many miles across here and then hook up with this highway to get to here and then to finally get supplies. And so that was really wild. And I did the painting on the boat and stuff, and it was really cool. It was a really cool experience to get to go up there and do that. And it made the papers up there. Like, this Texas guy comes from,
really?
Comes all the way from
That's
Texas
so funny.
And paints a boat, for the Katmai Lodge. And so I was like, dang.
You have a picture of it?
I do somewhere, but I don't know where it is now. I'd have to find it. I had this a long time ago, so a lot of my pictures have like kind of gone away. But yeah, it was a really cool experience. But I'll never forget asking the guy, you know, I said, the guy who took me up there, I said, man, why did you, I got to ask you a question. I said, I'm still a starting out artist. I said, why would you bring me when you could bring, you know, these guys who are already established?
Yeah.
You know, and I knew it was kind of like putting the noose around my own neck to ask this question. Like, why would you ask something stupid like that? But it was weighing on my mind. And he said, man, because I think you're a good guy who really wants to do things. And I think you have a lot of potential and you just need to get out and have some experience under your belt. You need to have these things.
This guy you'd never met before.
No, the guy I did the Tom Knapp painting with.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. Yes, okay.
And so he kind of knew me. He knew me already, but what he was telling me was, if you're going to be a sporting artist, if you're going to be a fishing guide, if you're going to be whatever you're going to be, you need to have experiences with those things to back you up. You need credibility. And that's what he was saying. He was saying my clientele, which are the guys I deal with now, are going to take me more serious if I can say, oh, yeah, I fished in Alaska.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You know, I've been down on Laguna Madre fly fishing for revenue. You know, they're going to be like, oh, cool. You know, well, this guy's obviously done this before, so he can get my painting
right
to have that look because he's been there and experienced. And that's one of the greatest compliments, I think. And I'm sure Larry Haynes and Cowan, was he still alive, and all of them would say the same thing is you want people to look at your artwork and say, oh, I smell the salt water. Or I feel the wind. Or I can smell the shotgun shells. Yeah. Or, you know, I felt it feels cold. I've been there before. I knew how it feels to feel cold and wet. And when I first started with Butch, and I know I'm bouncing around with stories here, but when I first started with Butch, I did this painting of a Labrador wading in the water with the hunter. And this guy came in and looked at it and thought about buying it. And he said, the dog doesn't look wet. The dog should look wet if he's in the water. And Butch called me and he's like, you didn't paint the dog well. Dogs should look wet. You got to do a lot better painting dogs. If you're going to paint hunting dogs in the water, they got to look wet. You know, they got to look like there's water all over them. They got to look glistening and shining and wet, you know, and matted fur and all that stuff. And I was like, oh, man, you know, I do need to work on that. And so now I can not paint a dog, like especially labs or something like, you know, in the water, and not want to like hear that in the back of my head.
Yeah.
You know, that's like always probably going to be with me. Make sure he looks wet. Make sure that dog looks like he's dripping wet, you know? And so it's just things like that, those experiences, like it has to, there's a point in time where the art stuff, what you see and what you know has to come together with what you've experienced to put that authenticity to it, to give that feeling. And so like when I do these paintings, it's so much better if I'm out there with the client and experience their hunting or fishing trips than them sending me pictures, honestly. I mean, I've been doing it long enough. I can get away with it now, but we were always taught you can't really portray this stuff unless you've been there and seen it. And that goes back to my professor. One time I was trying to do this painting and it was from Alaska. I've never been to Alaska, but there was this really cool picture I found, this moose in the lake and the mountains. And I mean, all the colors and trees. I'm like, oh man, this is gonna be a cool painting. I'm gonna do this. And I showed it to him. I said, hey, I want to try this painting. And he goes, why would you do that painting? I said, well, it looks like it'd be a fun painting. And he's like, have you ever been to Alaska? I said, no. He said, have you ever seen a moose in person? No. Then how can you give any authenticity or truth to this painting if you have no experience to go with it? And I was like, yeah, I guess you're right. You just ruined my idea of painting this moose, you know? And so after that, I understood how important it was to be a part of those things.
Heard.
And that's why, like, going out on the skiffs with Ryan and them or Joe Prado or Danny New or anybody or Chuck Nines or any of those guys, I've been like spending even time listening to their stories or been with them. I feel more connected to like doing a painting of them or something about them because I've been on that ride with them a little bit. Yeah. Maybe not all the cool stories they have, obviously, but like I've seen enough to get that feel. And it's just like when the first time you catch your redfish on a fly, you know, it's much different than catching it on a lure or under popping cork. You know, I mean, there's just a different experience. I'll never forget talking to Ernest. He and I were down fishing, and I said, Ernest, when you going to get a fly reel out? Oh, I don't know. You know, I hadn't really thought about it much. Like, this was a while back. And finally, I started seeing him fly fishing, and I messaged him. I said, hey, how's that going for you? And he's like, love it. Like I told you, man, it's like a different feeling. It's just, it's very addicting.
Yeah.
There's something about it's like it's a hunting thing crossed over with fishing to me. It's like stalking a deer or something in the woods. You know, that one-on-one experience with that fish.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. On the subject of portrayals, I would like for you to tell me that, or repeat the story that you told me earlier about some of your first things you ever read about the Lower Laguna Madre and like how it made you want to.
So when I was real young, we didn't go saltwater fishing much. I think I only got to go a few times, and it wasn't until about 94 when I met Mr. Gibb, the guy who found me at the Waller County Fair, that he had a place in Port O'Connor, and he would take me out, and he really helped me catch my first 20-something 28-inch redfish and a 22 or 24-inch trout I caught at the jetties. So that was the biggest like saltwater fish I'd ever caught up in that point. And before then, though, I used to watch like Fishing Texas and, with Tracy Bird, which Tracy Bird's from here, by the way. And so I would see them do these, Warren Allen and Keith Allen do these Texas fishing shows, and they would be all up and down the coast fishing. And, they're 1 minute they're catching bass at Lake Fayette, next minute they're in Rockport catching redfish and, shallow water wade fishing. So, but I always really liked the saltwater fishing thing. Because my dad used to always tell me, he grew up around San Bernard River and stuff, and they fished all the time saltwater. And they would always tell me how these redfish would fight these big bull reds, and you never know what you were going to catch in saltwater, just like my snook story. I'm after tiny, little trout. Next thing I know, there's a giant. And that was really cool. Like the lake fishing, you kind of know, okay, I'm going to catch a bass, a crappie, perch, or catfish. Well, as I started getting into the saltwater fishing thing, I wanted to do artwork about it. But again, like I was telling you a while ago, there was no experience to go with it. And so I was trying to paint these fish from photographs I found in Texas Parks and Wildlife magazine or CCA or whatever I'd find, these Tide magazine or whatever, and I would try to duplicate these pictures, and I just wasn't, you could tell there was some disconnection there. I hadn't felt that fish, touched it and smelt it or whatever it takes to do it, to give that real feel that goes into your body. Because like now when I paint redfish, people go, man, you can tell you've seen a redfish before. Or flounder. I hope so. Yeah. I hope so too at this point. And, it's, but then when I was a kid, I didn't have any connection to it.
Yeah.
Now, if I painted geese and ducks, they were like, oh my God, they look good. They look real. And I was like, well, it's because I live here in the rice fields. Like they're everywhere.
Yeah.
All the time. Like I watch them with binoculars. I've seen them. And, so finally I had gotten a subscription to like Tide magazine. And I don't remember, I think I saved up some money and I sent off for it or something like that. And this is back in the day when you had to there was no internet in the 80s. So
yeah, it was like mail-in subscriptions.
Mail-in subscription. It was like 2 or 3 weeks for you. When you're a kid, you got to wait 2 or 3 weeks. You run out to check the mailbox every day, waiting for your magazine. So it finally came in. And I remember this one page in particular opened up, and there was this article by this Captain Sparrow. And it wasn't Ryan, it was his dad, Scott. And I remember he was wading across this flat in Laguna Madre. And I thought, oh my God, that water looks like someone just ran their bathtub and put some sand and grass in it. Like it's wild. I was like, oh my gosh, it's so clear. And I grew up fishing in little cow ponds and stuff where it was a little clearer, some ponds, but most ponds, they weren't. And I'm thinking, man, this actually, there's a place like this. This must be like heaven, like this is just amazing.
Yeah.
People actually live in here. And then there was pictures in there of sunrises with the Laguna Madre and stuff that he had shot, and him holding a big trout, I think on a fly is one of the pictures I saw. And I just remember going, oh man, I've got to find a way to get down there someday. And I think it was a few years later, like when I was in college or out of college, I started calling down there trying to find those guys to find a way to if I could just come take pictures with them for the day.
Yeah.
I knew I couldn't afford to pay for a guide service. I was still young. I didn't have any money. But if I could just get down there and just ride around with them, the boat, just let me snap some shots. That's all I need. I just need to see it, feel it. And, and it's funny now because I fish with Ryan, which is the younger Sparrow.
Yes.
Little Sparrow. And so I'm fishing with him. And there's one day we're in the skiff. And I don't know if he told you the story. He was so mad at me. I'm at the front with the fly reel and he's poling. And I can't remember exactly which place we were in. My son was in the middle, sitting down, probably eating chips or drinking something because that's what he usually did. And as we're getting close, there's a pot of redfish in front of us, and their tails come up.
Mm-hmm.
And I put the rod and reel down and pick up my camera, and I just start snapping shots.
Mm-hmm.
And Ryan's like, "Oh my gosh, what in the world are you doing?" It's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Dude, this is gold.
Yeah.
You don't understand. This is gold for me. This is my livelihood."
Yeah.
I've caught redfish before. If I really want to go catch a redfish, I'll put a dead shrimp on the bottom of a weight and throw it in the river and go catch one. But I said, this is them in action doing stuff I've always wanted to see. And this is I don't want to miss this. You know, the camera's got to be out on this. And he's just like, "Oh my gosh, you know, like you should be throwing a line right now." And later on down the road, when I showed him the pictures, he's got some of them. He's posted some of them too before. And he laughs and he goes, "You know, I never really understood why you did that till later on. And now I see those pictures and I'm so glad we have them."
Yeah.
Because it commemorates that memory. And I said, "Ron, we can always catch a fish."
Mm-hmm.
I said, some of these moments sometimes only happen for split seconds and they're gone.
Yeah, that's true.
And you know, you photographed pictures too before, and your pictures. And when I went to see Scott Sparrow for the first time, Ryan's dad, and meet with him, you know, he had some really cool pictures. And the pictures, like till this day, he said, still take him back to that day.
Yeah.
But if he didn't have those pictures, the memory might fade. And so that's why I tell him, like, the paintings are important to people. And the pictures, like you were talking about earlier, painting is treasure to the person who buys it. Like when I was giving you that thing earlier, at least from an artist point of view, it's not that big a deal because, you know, we feel like it shouldn't be precious to us, but we are glad that the people who take them home with them, it is important.
Yeah. And
I've had them so important that, you know, I had a man who passed away one time and the painting was on an easel next to his coffin.
Wow.
You know, I've had a little girl who was in Texas Children's Hospital who was dying, who just wanted an artist to come draw with her. And I brought art supplies and drawings to see her. And I remember the drawing, the picture was, you know, how important that stuff was to her. And people think, oh, you know, artwork's just colored inside the lines. Well, there's a lot more to artwork than that.
No, it's artwork is like painting light, in my opinion. That was the way that Larry Haynes had actually phrased it. That it was when he was painting, it was trying to capture all the light and essentially illustrate what it was doing. Like, this is more with water and stuff like that and whatnot. But yeah, I that's the way I would see it. I was going to ask you earlier what your favorite painting was, but I feel like you won't be able to give me a good answer because you're your own critic, right? So I'm going to change that question, and instead I want to ask you, what is the painting that you think that has inspired you the most that isn't yours? So another artist. Ooh, there's a bunch of them, so I don't know. That's hard. You can give me a list. You can give me a list of a couple people.
Oh, Jack Cowan, obviously. I met Mr. Cowan one time too when I was younger, and that was really cool. I met him. Matter of fact, I have his print.
I'm looking at it right behind you.
Memories behind me. The first time I ever met him, he had that with him.
Wow.
And so I remembered I had just learned to wade fish in Port O'Connor, and my brother was with me, and we were fishing this place called Whitaker Flats. And my brother was real young, and he was scared to be in the water. And Mr. Gibb just kind of dropped us off and backed the boat out because he'd never had kids, so he didn't really know how to deal with this. But so we're out in the middle of this flat by ourselves, you know, just waiting around, and we don't know really what we're doing because we've never done this before.
Yeah.
And I can't keep my eyes off the water because it's clear, and I can see the sand and little crabs and little sand spots and little holes and like Larry's talking about the light fracturing through the water and little glistening things. And my brother's over there whining and crying. He's about 10 yards from me, and I'm telling him to be quiet and behaving. And the whole time I'm reeling the spoon in, and I'm yelling at him. I turn to look, and this redfish has been trailing my spoon the whole time. And I brought him, like, I was so busy arguing with my brother, I brought the fish like right up to my leg almost. And he turns and bolts. Yeah. And I'm really mad at my brother now. I just missed my only opportunity to feel like what that painting Memories was like by Cowan. And that painting, when I saw it, you know, I was like, that's what it was like that day, being on that flat. There was a duck blind out there in the water. You know, it's just like, okay, this is all the cool ingredients that makes the Texas coast interesting. You know, the water, the crabs, the wind, the sea, the salty smell, you know, it's just all the things we enjoy about going out there. The mangrove bushes, the way they go into the water. You're like, I see when I go out there, like I told Ryan, and I've told Ernest this too, and Ernest and Ryan both agree with me. We both look at it from different perspectives sometimes. Like we're looking at not just the fishing aspect, but all the things around it. And you probably do this too. Like the cool designs or patterns sometimes late in the evening, the way the mangroves and the sand will work. the way the water reflects and stuff. I mean, you get caught up in that stuff sometimes. You're like, this is really cool. It's not just about fishing. And so Cowan was big. John Dearman was a big inspiration to me. I'd liked Herboth's work, but there was a guy called David Moss, and he was a artist out of Minnesota, I think it was, and he did waterfowl and quail and pheasants and game birds, stuff like that. And when I was a little kid, I used to look at his stuff all the time. You know, if I found a picture in a magazine and it was like an inch square by inch square of his thing, I would cut it out and keep it in this little folder I had because there was no internet back then.
Yeah.
Well, I remember there was this dentist I used to go to, and he had artwork on the walls. And he had a bunch of calendars of David Moss's work. And I used to sit there and just drool over them. And he was like, every time the calendars would end, he would save them for me and give them to me.
Wow.
Well, then I'd take them home and paint them, you know.
Yeah.
I would copy this stuff because I didn't have any teachers. So I had to learn at that time, you know, young. If I wanted to get good, I thought, well, I was always kind of taught by my dad and my grandpa and them, if you're going to be good at something, work from the best, you know. And I had no training at that point in time. I didn't learn about who Michelangelo was and Raphael until I was in high school. You know, this was when I was, 10, 12 years old doing these little duck paintings. And I would copy those paintings and I would savor every little clipping from David Moss's work. And I was really gravitated toward the waterfowl because that's where I grew up. That's where I spent more time. Every year I couldn't wait to hear the geese and ducks coming because I knew the north wind was coming, cooler weather. I was a little kid, so holidays were coming, family and Christmas and stuff, favorite times of the year, which still is, so it was all the things I enjoyed. And I enjoyed hearing the geese flying over because I knew that honking meant that the winter was coming,
Yeah.
And I would say those guys were really, I think especially him, was a big inspiration on me. And I remember my freshman year in high school, I think it was, or I can't remember, my mom it was my dad and I were together. My mom and dad had been divorced, and I think my dad or my mom or somebody had bought me his book and gave it to me for Christmas. And I packed that book with me everywhere. I could almost tell you every page of which painting was coming up next, just because I spent so much time researching and studying his work.
Yeah.
Now today, no, I don't really look at anything of his anymore at this point. Like that was good for the time that I needed it, and now I've moved on to. I look at a lot of Western artists now, his stuff, and I look at a lot of modern artist stuff. I look at, I don't know. There's not a whole lot of sporting art stuff I follow, honestly. I keep up with Paul Puckett stuff some, see what he's working on. Too. Yeah, I'd like to see what he's doing. Larry, I keep up with Larry's stuff, but Mr. Cowan's gone, Booth's gone, Barnes' gone. A lot of them passed away. Chance Yarbrough and I have become friends, and we talk sometimes. I haven't talked to Chance in a while though, but we used to keep up with each other. Hey, what you working on? What you doing? But it was more like contemporaries doing the same thing now.
Yeah, like
for
peers
me.
in the same space. Yeah,
yeah, kind of like you would. If you talk like one guy's talking to another guy or something, kind of thing. Where like, the people I looked up to is like most people like when I was a kid.
Yeah,
like those guys were big to me, and to get compared to them was a big thing. And it's also a big thing to know that I'm in the same field as him. Because one thing Jack Cowan told me was, he said, and it kind of broke my heart at the time. He told me, he said, you might not be a sporting artist someday. Because he goes, I didn't know I would be. He goes, as time goes on, you may do something else that you're going to be known for. So leave yourself open to other genres,
other
avenues, ideas.
Yeah.
Don't get yourself pigeonholed trying to do the same thing I did already. It's kind of been done, And so I think what's kind of funny because I went into the Western art market and I never thought I would have done that. And I've done portraiture and other stuff. And so I get people all the time telling me, they're like, man, you do so many different types of stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, I painted a shrimp boat painting here recently. Yeah. I just did because I was going down to, we were going over into Louisiana down Holly Beach, and we went all the way to Cameron. There was always cool shrimp boats over there. And I just love shrimp boats. I think they have this all the old texture and they're worn out, like colors. And people put the weird their names on them are kind of creative, and you got all these ropes and things, pulleys and everything going everywhere.
It's a little bit of history.
Yeah, they've been around forever, and they just have all this cool look to them. And so I'll enjoy painting those a lot too. And so I get inspired. I've been kind of inspired to do that here lately, but I don't know so much now. if there's like really one artist that I look at, I try to actually minimize looking at other artwork as much more now, because I want to not be influenced by others and try to find ways to be influenced by myself. Like I try to live this now where I'm trying to be creative with myself, like make myself try new things.
Gotcha.
Like adventure out, maybe try some new techniques, because as you get to a certain point with it, you want to start exploring new, avenues and venues. You want to be not in someone else's shadow.
Yeah, I can understand that.
You want to separate yourself from that. And, for years I've been told, man, your stuff looks just like Cowan's. I had one guy one time buy a painting because he thought it was a Cowan.
Really?
And I was like, crap, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I don't want that to happen. I want it to be a Carter.
Yeah.
Not that I don't love Mr. Cowan, I do, but and even he would be like, you don't want to be, in someone's shadow like that. You want to do your own thing. And I think that was the thing now I'm trying to do more than anything, is to branch off and experiment and come up with, try to look at other people's artwork less. I have hundreds of books you can see here in the studio of all kinds of artists.
Yeah.
And I still look through them sometimes, and I try to look through their own evolutions and see how they've changed. And there's one illustrator I really like, is Dean Cornwell, and the guy painted pretty much anything and everything. And he painted so many different styles. There was times you could put two of his paintings in the same room and probably not know it's the same guy did all.
Really?
And I'm okay with that.
That's so cool.
Picasso was like that. I saw a show of Picasso's work one time, and I was blown away how much he had changed. He was such a good draftsman in teenage years that he went into cubism and all these other things because he was bored with drawing realistic stuff. He was searching for something different. Now, some people say, I don't like his stuff. It just doesn't grab me. I get it. My high school kids and I have to argue with that all the time. They think abstract artwork's stupid and weird. Can't understand why anybody pay that much money for it. And sometimes I get what they're coming from on it. But at the same time, I try to explain to them, there's this whole thing about being fresh and creative and different and first time at something that separates you from people who've been doing the same thing over and over again for so long. And, you want to be someone who's branched out and created the newest thing. Because
of course.
Even if it's maybe down the road, not something you're as proud of or think it was a good idea, you're still constantly evolving and changing and looking for new things. Like there's paintings I do now, I think, oh man, this is new. This is something different I'm doing. And then later on I look at it and go, that really wasn't a good idea.
Yeah.
But you don't know it until you try first.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I think you have to do, is you have to constantly in this business be creative. And I'm sure, I don't know how like fishing guides, I've heard some of them talk about trying new things, experimenting. I know y'all look up, there's always new lures and flies and things coming out. People are always trying to invent, to look at new ideas there. But I think in the art world, there's so many artists. It's so hard to do stuff now that's no one else has done.
Yeah.
So it's really tough to come up with your own style and stuff and not be just like everybody else. When I was a kid, there was a poster on the wall in one of my classrooms, and I don't know why. It always stuck to me. There was a herd of horses at the top of the poster running across a field. And at the bottom, there was a horse running by itself. And it said, you can either run with the herd or blaze your own trails. And I've always liked the idea of the horse that blazes his own trail. Yeah. And so I'm still with the herd, though. I feel like I still haven't broke off and blazed my own trail. I mean,
I think that the one painting you have, which is the chick swimming with the tarpon, I think that's one of the most unique paintings I've ever seen.
Oh, yeah. And when I did that painting, people were just kind of like weirded out by it.
Why? I thought it was really, really good.
Well, it was in a show a while back, and this guy, the judge, he was like, I just don't understand why that woman was with those fish. That would be a really scary situation. And I'm like, okay, he obviously doesn't know anything about tarpon, for one.
Yeah.
And, he didn't know anything about Michelangelo using the tarpon on the Sistine Chapel as for Jonah and the Whales thing. And that tarpon have been around for a long time. They date back to prehistoric times. And so, and that they can breathe, actually, like I had heard somewhere, and I know I might be wrong about this, but I'd heard sometime when there was a hurricane in like Florida one time, and the aquarium's power got wiped out, that the tarpon survived because they could still breathe.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
Enough oxygen just to survive. And so I thought, man, these are creatures who've been around for a long time. And the whole part of the painting is that she is a symbol of like Mother Earth bringing them back to the Texas coast. That she was guiding them back home.
I like that a lot.
Bringing them back to us. And that's why it's called a queen among kings. because we always call the tarpon the Silver King. And it was the idea of this queen type mermaid water goddess. She was bringing these tarpon back to the coast.
Wow.
And hopefully getting them back to where they need to be with all of us to be able to enjoy and see them, experience them. And I am avid about, I do like to eat fish. I do keep some sometimes.
Yeah.
But I'm a big fan of turning them back too. Like I want my kids to grow up and be able to see them and stuff. And unfortunately, you can't do that with the waterfowl thing. You can't shoot a duck and then turn it back loose.
Yeah.
It's pretty much dead. It's over. So it's different. But with the fishing, I really love how many guys have jumped on the bandwagon of conservation and being cool. Just like, I caught this really cool big fish, but, I'm turning loose. And that's one thing I love about fly fishermen is they very rarely keep their fish.
Yeah.
Mostly because I don't think they want to get their boats dirty, but,
I don't think you're wrong there either.
I know that's like a huge thing with those guys. Like, it's like I don't want my Corvette bumped. But Ryan about killed me one time because I got some mud in the boat with him. I thought he was going to lose it.
Nah, Ryan gets the boat dirty. I don't know. That's a hypocrite thing for him to say.
But yeah, I've seen a few guys get kind of messy about that. And I think one time I went out with some guys to do a photo shoot. And I told them, I said, look, I need to get pictures of your boat. But I'm going to have to get out in the water and stand, and you're going to have to pull the boat towards me so I can get some pictures. I can't be in your boat and get pictures of the boat. It doesn't work that way. Well, I don't want to get my boat dirty. And I was like, well, I don't know what to tell you. Get the pictures. We got to do it. We got to do what we got to do. I said, I'll put some waders on, and we can wash, and take them off. I can sit on the side of the boat, take the waders back off, hip boots, and we can get them real good and washed off as much as we can before we get them back in the boat. No, they still didn't like that idea. I said, but that's pretty much the only way we're going to be able to do this. So they eventually agreed to it. But yeah, the guy was so upset. He was like, I thought he was going to lose. He was like just running back and forth, trying to clean the boat the whole time. I was, all the way back to the dock. You could tell it was just driving me crazy. There was a little bit of water and mud. And I'm like, it's okay for
giving us a bad look.
Oh my God, my fly fishing boat's ruined. It's like, no, it'll be okay. But yeah, it's just, stuff like that that you deal with different with fly fishermen. They are a little different than the guy who wades, and definitely different than the guy who's chunking, 80-pound car battery with a hook attached to it to catch a redfish. It's different with each customers and stuff, and with the people and different commission ideas. You never know what you're going to get sometimes.
Heard. No, I totally agree. I want to ask one more question before we start to close it out. But the question actually has to do with what I'm looking at on the wall right now.
Oh gosh.
I think that's a side of you that I've never heard of, and I would love for you to kind of get into what we talked about before we hopped on air.
Okay, so if you're in my studio right now, there is one side of my studio that is full of Transformers.
Yes.
big.
By no exaggeration, literally full.
There's a lot of them. There's probably about 100 of them, and some of them are actually hard to find. Like they're handmade Transformers. Like you can't go to the store and get them. And people always ask me, like when they come in. And I say, you know what? There's people who collect all kinds of stuff. I mean, obviously, there's the lady who likes little chickens all over her kitchen. And there's people who collect little pigs. And there's people who collect horses. And I know fly fishermen who collect all kinds of flies. Even I do that. I love collecting flies. I may never use them, but I try to get as many as I can just because I love them. And so when I was a kid in the 80s, 1984 is when the Transformers came out, and I really, really, really gravitated toward that cartoon. I loved it. Like I thought it was so cool, the artwork that they could make those dudes change and look like robots and then look like a plane or cars. And I was a big plane person, still am. I try to go to Houston air shows like every year. I study World War II history, especially in aviation stuff like Mustangs. I've been inside of a B-17 bomber, riding over Galveston before.
Wow.
I try to, do anything I can. If there's airplane shows or any kind of jets or anything, my heart still races every time I see one. I get excited. And so the Transformers had those planes and robots and stuff. I wasn't gravitating toward the cars as much, though. I loved the Optimus Prime character because he was the leader, and he always had all this good moral things about doing the right thing first and stuff. And so it's one of the things the 80s cartoons I thought was really cool. Like a lot of times they had good morals and a lot of values in the cartoons, I don't see it as much in my kids' cartoons nowadays, especially the weird ones on the YouTube videos and stuff where there's guys sitting around just playing video games and then acting weird and stuff the whole time. I don't get into that. So I always wanted Transformers, and I had some couple buddies who had a bunch of them, and I'd go and see them and get to play with them, but I'd come back home. We didn't have them. My mom and dad, we just didn't have a lot of money, and they worked. Like, I think my dad worked 2 jobs, and my mom would work, and they did everything they could to have stuff and make sure those 2 boys were taken care of. And so when I got older, my son and I were living by ourselves, and he started getting into them. And so when he would collect them, I started getting a few of them here and there, and I would keep them on the shelf, some of the ones that he didn't want, and so I'd get some too. And then I told myself, you know what, I'm going to get some of them to keep, and maybe I'll sit around and draw them one day or mess with them or something, do something with them or whatever, And my sons now have actually used some of them for like little animation videos they've made.
Oh, no kidding.
So they've used some of them for that. So I just started collecting them. And then when Samantha and I got married and we had Caden and Zoe and Alexa and Macy, and now we have Samuel and my son from my first marriage, Austin, the kids loved them. Like, even the girls love them. Like, they come in here all the time and just sit around and look at them. And I've talked about getting rid of all of them.
Really?
Like, just selling them off, getting rid of them. And my kids are like, no, don't get rid of them. We love them.
It's an impressive collection.
Well, my wife's always like, no, it's too much part of the studio now. Like, people come in, they see them. It's like part of who you are. You always loved them. I still wear the Transformer t-shirts sometimes from the 80s and stuff. And so she's like, no, it'd be really weird if you got rid of them. And so there's 2 things that were big for me in the 80s was Transformers and Michael Jordan, and Walter Payton, the Chicago Bears, but that was kind of a short-lived experience. But Michael Jordan's career in basketball, my good friend Ray Trevino, he was from Houston, Texas. I'm still good friends with. Matter of fact, texted me this morning since we were like little kids. Mm-hmm. He was a big Transformers fan and Michael Jordan. And so he and I always hung out together, and he was the athlete guy, star, like running back for the team, played basketball and baseball and stuff. And he even went off to play like baseball later on. And I did artwork. Mm-hmm. That was my thing,
Yeah.
And so we had these things though that we had in common. And so we became very good friends over these things we love, like Michael Jordan, watching him, every day. He and I would get up early in the morning in our homes, see what Michael did the night before. If he scored 40, 8 rebounds and 10 assists, we'd come to school and relive the highlights that we watched. And the Transformers kind of the same thing. We enjoyed the idea of these characters who were special to our time period, I guess. So when I collected them, I see like this really cool thing that kind of takes me back to when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And also, I tell people, I said, have you ever collected any artwork? And they're like, oh, yeah, well, I have this little sculpture in my house I like of a bear, catching a salmon or something. Mm-hmm. Okay, I said, well, this is kind of my artwork sculptures.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of the way I look at it. And I said, I see an artwork in the way these are done that's different from my artwork, and I think that's what gravitates me toward.
That's interesting. That's a good point.
But people come in my house all the time, and out here, they think that they should see, like, just fishing and hunting stuff everywhere.
I was expecting to see that.
Yeah, that's what everybody expects to see. And there is some of that. I mean, you got quail over there mounted, you got fish, and now if you go in the house, there's a bunch of ducks mounted on the wall, there's a bunch of cow prints, there's a bunch of my fishing stuff, but I kind of keep that in here. My studio is more about who I am, my own personal loves, things that make me comfortable. Because one thing about a studio, I was always taught, it's some place you have to be able to be by yourself and want to be there. If it's cold and not, personal for you, it's not someplace
not inviting or something. Yeah, I get it.
Like, I get excited when I come in here. I'm sure my wife and kids wouldn't want to hear that, but I do get excited when I come here and I can just be here. This is my home, and this is where I want to do my work, and this is where I feel like I can spend 8 or 9 hours painting. Or like lately, I've been coming home from work at 3:30 when I get home, or 4, and coming out here to stay until 8 or 9.
Yeah,
and painting. And so, but it has to be a place that you want to be comfortable with. And so I remember Mr. Newman and I used to talk, and he used to say, oh, you should never play music in your studio. It's a distraction. But if you go back to history, Leonardo da Vinci had, people come in and play music for him while he painted.
Yeah.
Well, at one time I went in his studio, he was listening to jazz. I say, hey, what are you talking about? He goes, well,
hypocrite.
well, he was like, I taught y'all that when y'all were young to teach y'all to get focused. But as you get older, he'd watch a football game. Like I last year, I was listening to old 1990s Chicago Bulls championship games while I was painting. Mm-hmm. Here lately, I've been on the NFL kick with listening to old, it's called, I think, A Life of NFL or Players, something like that. It's some documentaries about famous players like Vince Lombardi, Terry Bradshaw, Earl Campbell, Walter Payton. And I've been listening to those, and they're very inspirational. Like, listen to their life, their stories and stuff, and how they got to where they were, things they went through. And so that's kind of one of those things. And so my whole studio is always supposed to be like a place to try to keep me motivated. Kind of like, I guess, Batman's cave.
No, I get it. I see. Yeah, I get it.
So, and that's kind of why you get all this weird stuff in here with the Transformers.
And stuff. It's cool. It's really impressive, the kind of collection that you have here.
Yeah, people come in here and video it.
I mean, I'm gonna take a picture for it before I leave.
That's fine.
One last thing was the book. You actually gave me four really awesome paintings that I was able to use for the book, which was, I was honored that you even gave me one. I would like to know what you think about it.
Well, I was, first of all, extremely honored to even be a part of it. So many talented, wonderful people who make Texas such a rich, wonderful place to be, and guys who are all, and I don't know all of them, and ladies too. Mac's in there, and she's an amazing young lady. Got to spend some time with her at the Houston Fishing Show a few years ago. See her, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, really see her career start taking off at that point. And there's a lot of friends in there, guys I've shared time with, people I've shared stories with. I mean, hell, I've done a painting of you before. Yeah. So before I even met you. So it was really cool to see that, go down and know you're in there too. And I don't know, you have certain goals in life. And I've always been one of those people, I feel like I've been real blessed. Like, if I say I want something to happen, I know this is going to happen someday, it does. And one of them has always been in a book like this. A book that, eventually I want to do a book about my artwork. I want it to be something like from the coast to the mountains. It goes all the way from fishing to Western art.
That'd be cool.
All back and forth, parallels to the time period when I was doing fishing and a Western painting. Oh my gosh, how'd you jump from this guy fly fishing to this guy, killing a buffalo?
Would you write about it too?
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting. Cool, and I would like to get people that are friends of mine to be involved in it, that know stories and stuff. And one of my biggest things, and that's one of the things I loved about this book so much that you came out with, is I think it's so important in this world to understand, to be successful, the people that helped make you get successful, the people that brought you full force, to where you are. And I was watching some of those NFL things the other day. Yeah. And I think it was Joe Namath who said, life, I finally realized to be successful in life, you still have to be part of a team. It's not just about being a team player on the football field, but in life itself. And I think that's really cool, all the people you brought together, in this book. Those guys have all been inspirations to me. Ryan and them and Joe and Danny have been part of painting ideas. If I didn't spend time with them, I never would have had those, the experiences. Ernest has been a guy that's brought stuff to me. And Chuck Nizer is in there, and Chuck's given me advice before and helped me. So it's really cool to see all these different guys and people. And so I'm just, like I said, I'm extremely honored. I'm really humbled. And it was amazing to see the book today, to see how beautiful it is.
Yeah,
it's
6
such
pounds.
a beautiful book. Yeah, I can whack my kids now with it if they get it online. Don't call CPS on me, people. I'm kidding. But, it's a really cool book. And it's one of those books that I think everyone should have that has any love for fishing on the Texas coast or even outside the Texas coast. Because I think guys from Florida could look at that book and still relate to it.
I mean, I appreciate those words. It was really nice here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a blessing for us, and it's a blessing that I get to even be a part of it. Like I said, this is something that I've always wanted to do, and now I get to do it with you and so many other guys I care about and love as friends and family. And so it's amazing. And then they have that story in there about the snook too. It's pretty cool.
That was cool that you got to write about that. Okay, well, to wrap it up, I always do the last 2 questions. First one being, looking back at all the things that you've done in quite a tedious career of just illustrations alone, is there anything you wish you would have done differently?
Yes. I wish I would have spent less time drinking and partying in those down times I had where I didn't paint as much and would have been working. I regret my work ethic dropping off. But I know now why those time periods have happened, because I've had to help a lot of high school kids who have had problems. Being an art teacher is not about really teaching art. It's about teaching life, And your own experiences translate to these kids. And there's kids I've had to save from things.
Really?
And become like their parent. Like I've literally been like their parent.
Wow.
And now there's one in particular I'm really fond of. He's a great young man. He still calls me dad. And I have quite a few of them that call me dad. I had one a while back this car runs up on me and the window comes down. I'm like, who is this? And he's like, Dad. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh. And so, but it was because I went through those things. I could sit down with those kids and relate to them.
Yeah.
And tell them, well, guess what? Teachers are not just made in a perfect little factory and shipped out to you in a box and brought to a classroom. We have horrible lives sometimes too, or bad things we've been through. And I went through, that drinking and stuff. And I also grew up in a family who did a lot of drinking and some things that were not so good there either. And that's a whole nother conversation. And so when these kids would tell me things, I realized, well, you went through these experiences for a reason.
Yeah. They
weren't good, and you don't like them, look back on them as good, but you know now that they can help you. And I don't miss any of that stuff either. Like, I love my life now. I enjoy hitting the door every evening and seeing my kids, even though everybody's daddy, 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 and there's 6 of them doing daddy, so it's a lot of daddies. And I enjoy seeing them grow and blossom and be able to also teach them what not to do because I did things. And not that I say people shouldn't go have a good time. Yeah. I'm not downgrading it. I'm saying I was living too much on the with it. Like it was overtaking my life at some point. So that's where it's like, I'm glad that's over with.
I guess you can argue that you can be authentic with your students the way you can be authentic with like your paintings. Yeah. Because you've experienced these things. It's kind of like the topic that kind of keeps coming up over and over in this episode.
Yeah. I mean, you have to, like, your experiences are so important.
Well, then that leads me right into the last question pretty seamlessly. As if you were speaking to the next generation coming into this industry, what is like a bit of advice that you would give them?
Well, I think the biggest thing I would tell them is like what Calvin told me. He was so right about that. You need to stay versatile. Keep yourself open to other venues. Don't be caught up in the sporting arts situation or something and expect that to be your only gravy train. Do other types of artwork. I think that's one of the things I wish I see more artists do is, and so many of them tell me this. They're like, oh, well, I only paint horses because that's all I've ever painted. And I'm like, well, why don't you go paint a goat or a chicken? Yeah. Pick something else off the farm. Like, give something else a shot. Like, I think you should always look at art like as a challenge and, make art part of you as much as possible. Don't get caught up in the photo you're working from and try to copy it, blossom out of it. Like a lot of my paintings, especially like the one over here with the quail I'm working on, that's made up of like 7 or 8 different photos. The trout painting I did that time, spoon fed, I think I counted there was like 40 or 50 different photos I'd researched through to try to find different spot patterns on trout, different fins, different gill plate images, different eyes, different teeth. And Chester Moore, who's editor of Texas Fish and Game, he told me one time, he said, I really love your trout stamp you did for CCA that time. I said, why is that? And he goes, because you did 2 different size shaped teeth. You didn't do both the trout teeth the same length. And they're not always the same length. They're both different. Like one's a little more smaller than the other sometimes. And he said, you caught that. So that was really cool that you were paying attention. And I said, well, I go through photos and I look at my artwork like a scientist would. Like I have to understand how this thing, and that's one of the things Calvin said too, is if you're going to be a successful artist, you need to understand how something moves and works, the mechanics of these things. To be a good artist, you need to understand. And when I took life drawing classes, that's the best class an artist can take. And people are going to be like, oh, that's drawing nude models. But that's drawing people. Anatomy is huge because it translates into drawing trees. It translates into drawing flowers. It translates into drawing animals, birds, fish, or even beds of grass. Understanding the shape, the dynamic of how it looks can give you a more realistic feel to it or a more cartoony, or, just a bad, poor look to it. So you have to understand what you're working with. What's it going to look like? And that's why I start carrying underwater cameras with me when I fish too. I would shoot as many pictures as I could, and people would laugh at me because one time I was hanging off the edge of a boat by the waist and I had a shrimp underwater taking pictures of And they were like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm hoping that nothing comes up here and bites this out of my hands while I'm doing it. Because I'm holding this shrimp and I'm like photographing it. And it wound up being the Texas fishing stamp.
No kidding.
The shrimp were used.
Wow.
In that painting. And I sent it to the guy later. I said, see, this is what the shrimp were photographed for that day. And he goes, oh, man, that makes so much sense now. And I'm like, yeah, it does, doesn't it? And he goes, so I always think like you are focused on the fish, but it's not just the fish, but the things around them too have to be part of it. Like I have what I'm doing of a decoy underwater with some fish, and it's called decoy because the lures decoy them in, and it's a design I'm working on. But I went and found an old duck decoy, some oysters, and muddied it up the decoy and got it as green and beat it up and punched holes in it. I told the guy, I need to take this outside so I can shoot it. And they're like, why? I'm like, I want it to look all crushed up like it's on the bottom of the bay. And, as much as authentic stuff you can get into as possible. And so like the girl, the mermaid with the tarpon, we shot photos underwater in a pool.
Really?
Yeah. Like we did 90-something shots underwater that day.
Jesus.
Me and her both, our eyes burned for like weeks because of all the chlorine.
Yeah.
Poor thing. And she kept her eyes open more than I did underwater. So she said she had to go home and just like sit in the tub and like run the water over her face for like hours. But that's how we got the shots.
Wow. Oh, wow, that's awesome. I'm glad you said that. I'm glad that was your piece of advice, because I don't disagree with you at all. And I feel like it's just I feel like it ties this episode up really, really well.
Yeah, I think it just that's my biggest thing. And that's why I was so excited about getting to do this with you, is get to try to go into explore. And I know I bounced around a lot because there's so many stories popping in my head.
Yeah, that's not a problem.
And that's what messes me up a little bit, because I'm like, I'm not staying on track, because I'm used to doing these things where you kind of stay on track with these things. But I really like this because I can just talk. And that's anybody that knows me, and Ryan's probably raising his hand right now saying, oh yeah, he talks a lot. And so is Matt Sherwood. He's probably like, oh yeah, Calvin talks a lot. I know for a fact. Anybody that knows me knows I do. And I tell them it's because, you stay bottled up in the studio for hours by yourself when you're finally free.
That's a good way to look at it, yeah.
And being a teacher, I can't say a lot of stuff around the kids that we can talk about here. You have to be careful. And so that's why I try to tell people, I said, when I finally get loose, I can finally tell these things. And I think it's important, like some of the stuff we talked about today. So artists and young people come up, they'll know, and hear these things down the road. Because I know the things that Calvin shared with me, I treasure those moments, that short time I spent with him, just to know, how he felt, to know this guy had been around with so many different people, and, he painted the bushes, out hunting, fishing and stuff like that. So, and Dearman did too. And so know that these guys had some great careers.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to follow in their footsteps and hopefully get, my own name eventually tacked on without being so, like, I want to be tied to a group with them, but not in their shadow.
I want to be part of the group. I don't want to be like a member of the group. I guess
I don't want to be the groupie.
Bingo. Yes, that's the best way to put it. Well, with that being said, is there anything else that you wanna say before we cut it out?
I just want to say thank you so much for coming. I know this is not a real close drive for you. We live way up here in Bridge City, Texas, which is right on the coast of Louisiana and Texas, which is actually a pretty cool coastal area. If you ever get a chance to come up here, there's a lot of fly fishing that goes up here, and I can tie you into some guys who do it up here. They have some pretty cool stories to tell, and they do kind of keep it quiet up here. It's not talked about as much, but it's done if you get in the right groups. But we just want to say thank you so much for giving us the opportunity from my family and I. And we so glad to be able to have you here in our studio. You should see the studio. It's turned into like a two different kinds of studios today. There's paintings on the easel on one spot, and then there's microphones.
There's on the other side.
Gear on the other side. So it's pretty cool. It's a little different. So now we just want to say thank you so much. We really are blessed to have this opportunity and to be a part of the book and stuff. And we hope that, your life will continue to blossom also.
I hope so.
Yeah. And hopefully we can all be a part of it and see it grow over the time. So.
Oh, yeah. All right, cool. Well, that's the last thing you want to say. Well, we're pretty much ready to rock and roll.
Thank you.
Yeah.